So in this whiteboard, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the site server roles. So previously we talked about sites, primary versus secondary sites, but a site is actually made up of many servers or server roles. So to start, let's just draw up here again our primary site server, and that gets connected into a database server of some sort. Right? So there's a connection between the database that we see listed here and our primary site server. So I'll go ahead and enter that in there. Okay, now other roles that we can have are going to include some very important roles. First off would be what we call a management point. So I'll go ahead and enter that in here. I'll just say MP for management point. So a management point is the actual point of contact that your agents are going to be connecting into. So for instance, if here are all my agents again that we drew in an earlier diagram, instead of connecting in general to the site, they actually are configured to connect to a specific management point within the site. Now you can have multiple management points, but it is the main point of communication between clients and the overall site server environment. Now, the management point itself will be connecting into the primary site server so that ultimately the data that is collected can go into the database. But what this does is it offloads all of the client connections and the client processing off of the primary site server onto what are probably going to be multiple management points. So I might put a management point in my various different branch offices. I might have 3 or 4 in my main office. The point being that I can have many of them to balance the load of all the client connections. Now, some other points that you might create, or probably will create, and we'll be creating a lot of these as we go through the class, would include a distribution point as an example. So I'll go ahead and put DP for distribution point. Now, we're not going to go through every single role here, but we'll mention a few of the highlights, and then many of the others we'll see as we go along. A distribution point is where we are going to store our actual files, the source files for things like the software that you want to deploy out to your clients, source files for operating system images if we're pushing out operating system images to our clients. So the flow here, as an example, would be that I configure things on my primary site server. All of the configuration is stored in the database, which is the site server database server. But when I configure them, the configuration goes out to the management point. Client agents are checking in with a management point periodically to find out if there's any new configuration for them. They get that configuration, and perhaps the new configuration is the fact that we have advertised a new program to them, a program that we want to install onto these client computers. Well, then their job is to then take that information, that advertisement that they've just received from the management point. Included in there will be a link to a distribution point. So they're going to go to the distribution point, connect directly in order to download the software packages that they are meant to install. So again, offloading the functionality, the processing, the amount of connections that are happening. Can you combine these roles onto a single server? Yes. Can we consolidate, some roles onto some servers and other roles onto others? Yes, you can. And there are going to be many other points that you'll see. For instance, a Pixie distribution point. Go ahead and label that here as my PXE, Pixie distribution point. This will come into play when you start doing operating system deployment. So once again, as soon as I want to connect and deploy operating systems to a particular client, the client checks in with the management point, receives an advertisement for a new operating system, and then connects to the Pixie point in order to retrieve additional information. Or perhaps it is Pixie booting, right? So I turn on a bare metal machine that has no operating system. I boot it off the network. It's going to retrieve its information from the Pixie service point. So there are many others. There are reporting points to handle the reporting. There are branch distribution points, which is the same as a distribution point, but kind of a streamlined version. We'll get into that a little bit later. We have state migration points, fallback status points. So all of these we'll need to define as time goes on, but the point is that a site is made up of many different server roles. They can either be consolidated onto one physical server or several servers, or each role could be its own dedicated server. So that's a little bit about site system roles.